In the old tales, slaying a dragon requires a runic sword, an enchanted arrow, or a knightly warrior of great purity. As it turns out, the brush guard of a 1978 Ford Bronco will do the job nicely. The dragon was a smallish one, two-legged, technically a wyvern. It had been in the process of chewing through the wattlelandaub wall of a peasant cottage to get at the low-caste Sylvan farm family hiding inside when it heard what sounded like the challenging snarl of a fellow beast. The wyvern turned to roar out a reply, just in time to take 2¼ tons of Detroit rolling iron to the face at 30 miles an hour. The Ford drove over the head and long, snaky neck, turned back around, and stopped beside the half-ruined farmhouse wall, front wheels pinning down the dragon's wing. The bumper and front grille were spattered with softly glowing orangish blood and a few broken teeth. The engine shut off, the only sounds now the tinkle of pixie bells from the nearby forest and the shallow, gurgling breaths of the dying wyvern. A woman climbed out of the Bronco. A human, tall for a woman and heavy-set, all dirty cargo pants, worn-out chambray, and steel-toed engineer boots. Frizzy dull brown hair was pulled into a sloppy ponytail. The left side of her face was mostly old scars, the eye on that side covered by a patch, the right side was unmarked, but heavy-jawed and coarse-featured. She'd been called the ugliest woman in the state of Mississippi enough times and by enough different people for her to assume it was probably true. The only thing about her one could call beautiful was the medallion hanging prominently on her chest, a silver oak leaf entwined with a golden flame, glittering brightly even when shadowed. With a sigh, the woman stared around the farmyard, taking in the shattered remains of coop and shed, the splinters of an orchard. A pair of legs and a lower torso in sylvan homespun lay in a pool of blood, the upper body nowhere to be seen. The woman cursed softly and pulled a lever-action Marlin rifle out of the truck. "Y'all still alive in there?" she called. For several seconds there was no answer, then a nervous, "Is the dragon dead?" in a high, lilting voice. The woman jacked the Marlin's lever and put a .357 through the wyvern's broken face from 2 feet away. Then another, just to be sure. Scales flew and brain matter stained the dirt. "It's dead enough." The family came out, slowly, uncertain. 2 adult Sylvans, slender, knife-eared, probably early middle-aged, though elves didn't really show that the way humans did. Sylvan, drow, wildling, or high fae, they all kept that youthful, sharp-boned, fashion model look until they were well senile. It was the eyes, the tiredness in them, that gave away the age. Then 3 children, 1 a toddler and 2 who would have been about school age if Sylvan peasants had schools. All in green and brown homespun, none obviously bleeding. All obviously terrified. "Is this all of you?" the woman asked. "All except Teriel, our oldest," the husband replied, almond eyes flicking uneasily between the dead wyvern and the human looming over him. "He had his bow and tried to distract the beast while I gathered the other children." His wife's eyes suddenly found the blood-stained legs lying in the dirt and she let out a wail, a high, keening sob of utter heartbreak. She sank to her knees, clutching her 3 young ones to her as she wept. The husband simply closed his eyes and swallowed hard, mouthing his son's name. The human knelt beside the dragon's carcass and fingered the thin true silver chain around its neck. A moment's search brought a small pendant into view, crossed spears in a wreath of willow leaves. A hard tug snapped it free. "Recognize this?" The Sylvan father stared at the pendant for a long moment, fear warring with sorrow and hate in his eyes. "Baron Sulthalion. His tower is 2 leagues east, across the dell. His lands start once you cross the brook there." He let his gaze drift back to the remains of his child. "I had heard," he said, voice brittle, "that Baron Sulthalion has a quarrel with Baron Indiriel, long may he rule us." The woman sighed and stretched her back. Cross-country driving in an old truck was rough on the spine, even with the Fey realm's lower gravity. "Feudal shit again," she spat. "The High Queen warned the nobles to settle their asses down. Our Baron reminds us that the High Queen rules in Tir na nog, but he rules here." The Sylvan farmer's voice was sorrow-beaten, resigned. No doubt Baron Selthalion feels the same. The High Queen rules as far as she can reach, the woman corrected. Which also means as far as I can reach. Stepping to the rear of the Bronco, she began rummaging inside. I'll get your boy's remains out of that critter for burial. She pulled a chainsaw out of the truck and shook it, feeling the slosh of a half-full tank. Then I'm heading to the Baron's. I'm gonna do me some reaching. Baron Selthalion's tower was like most Hi-Fi architecture, thing of swooping, organic lines, gentle curves, a rounded minaret. Hi-Fi disdained straight lines and hard angles as things for peasants' constructions. To the woman from Mississippi, it looked like a giant stonework dick. There was no wall or moat around the tower, only beds of flowers of every color known and some that human language has no word for. These beds made fanciful whirls about the tower's base and spun out into the surrounding glade. Belled pixies flitted about the place, gathering nectar, while meadow sprites and a few sylvans moved among them, tending and weeding. A single, meandering path wound through the flowers to the tower's gate, sown with sweet clover and kept trimmed by the grazing of unicorn foals. The unicorns scattered in alarm as the Ford roared up the path, tires slinging clots of mud and clover into the air, leaving ruts. The truck braked hard, sliding to a stop a few yards from the tower's portcullis, where a pair of silver-mailed Hi-Fi knights stood guard. As they gaped at the strange apparition, nervously fingering their spears, the driver honked the horn, long and loud. Who dares come thus into the domain of Baron Selthalion, long may he rule us, a guard began, full of bluster, as the woman climbed out of the Bronco. Ninth of his lineage, scourge of. Yeah. Shut up, she snapped, interrupting. She tapped the medallion on her chest with her left hand, the lever gun dangling in her right. Both arms were coated to the elbow in wyvern blood. See this? Keeper of the High Queen's peace, that's who dares. Tell the Baron to get down here. I got something to give him. The Baron is occupied, the other knight sniffed. He is preparing to ride on a chevauchee against the lands of Baron Indirial and... No, he ain't. He's bringing his ass down here and talking to the High Queen's emissary. Or the High Queen's emissary can go up and get him. The knight arched a delicate golden eyebrow. Emissaries are normally respectful of their hosts. Diplomatic. Oh, I am being diplomatic. See how I'm standing here, talking to you instead of just walking in there over your body. That's diplomatic as hell. She smiled tightly, a particularly unpleasant expression on an already unpleasant face. Now, are you gonna go fetch the Baron, or is diplomacy time over? You have defiled your betters with your presence long enough, she-beast, the knight spat, bringing his spear to bear two-handed. Take yon contraption and begone, or your blood shall fertilize these gardens. The woman sighed. It's gonna be like this, huh? Shame. She slung the rifle on her right shoulder to free both hands and took a step forward. It really was a shame. The elf knight had a fine chiseled face that made Orlando Bloom look like a pug dog. Too damn bad. The knight scowled, hesitated just a moment at the sight of the High Queen's medallion his spear was aimed at, then thrust. The move was like every motion made by an elf. Graceful. Elegant. Almost a dance. Not nearly fast enough. The woman sidestepped the thrust with room to spare. Left hand caught the spear shaft and yanked the knight towards her, off balance. Right fist swung in an overarm punch and the elf knight's nose seemed to explode across his face. Elves in general and Hi-Fi in particular are far lovelier than any human could ever hope to be. Their movements are so graceful and fluid as to be living art. They are possessed of magics both subtle and mighty and share a deep and fundamental connection to their world and all things that live upon it. But elves are also short, skinny, bird-boned, and stringy-muscled. Having evolved in a world of lower gravity, higher oxygen levels, and with magic to cushion and smooth their way through life, even the strongest HFY paladin or most skillful drow assassin is weaker than a human. Less durable than a human. Slower than a human. The knight fell asprawl in front of the portcullis, blood puddling around his winged helmet. Sir Alharion, the knight's partner cried, hefting his own spear. Murder. Nah, he's still breathing, the woman replied easily. But you poke at me with that thing and we might just have us a murder. The knight raised his weapon and lunged. Baron Selphalion and his retinue arrived at the tower entrance to find one of his sentries lying in a pool of blood and the other being used as a doorknocker. A large, eye-patched woman held the unfortunate elf knight by the hair, pounding him face-first into the portcullis bars. She released him as the Baron's party stopped in the entryway. The knight collapsed in a mailed heap. The woman and the elf stared at each other for a moment, the woman evaluating as men-at-arms fanned out protectively, unlimbering bows. There were 6 HFY archer knights, just regular guard types by the look. A couple of unarmed sylvan servants trying to fade into the background. A HFY in scholar's robe who looked like he wanted to throw up. 2 HFY in overly decorated armor that resembled something a pimp would wear to a Dungeons & Dragons convention, flower-etched shoulder guards, velvet half-capes with ermine trim, and worse. One of those 2 should be her guy. Hey! Which one of y'all is Baron Selphalion? The snottier-looking of the 2 pimped-out elves gave a haughty toss of his head. I am the lord of this house. He drew himself up, obviously put out that he was still a good 7 inches shorter than her. How dare you assault my retainers thus? She shrugged and prodded the crumpled knight with her boot. I actually told this one I'd kill him, but sometimes I'm just too nice. The name's B.J. Bellamy. She tapped the leaf and flame medallion hanging on her chest. Keeper of the High Queen's Peace. If you'll step out here, I got something I think is yours. A sneer, oddly beautiful, rolled along the Baron's lip, the kind of thing Hollywood A-listers and boy-band heartthrobs wished they could pull off. Really? I had heard that the High Queen had chosen a human from the poisonous world as her emissary, not a she-cyclopes. Nay, father, chuckled the other pimp knight. That is obviously an ogre. No mere cyclops is so ghastly of face and form. You're attracting my attention, Junior, Bellamy warned the younger elf. You do not want my attention. Indeed. I can imagine few men would want your attentions. Bellamy snorted and shook her head. Walked right into that one, didn't I? She motioned curtly for the elves to follow and walked to the rear of her vehicle. The robed elf rushed to his baron's side. My lord, I must advise that you tread lightly here. To act against the keeper of the High Queen's peace is to act against the High Queen, herself. And the High Queen is in Tir na Nog, the Baron's son argued, waving the advisor away. My father is master in this land and will uphold our rights and dignities as he sees fit. The Baron raised a hand, palm up. A purplish glow gathered there and a moment later a similar glow formed around the portcullis. He made a lifting gesture and the barred gate slid upwards until it rested on its catch and the way was open. The Baron strode through, followed by his knights. The advisor lingered behind, sighing, and directed the servants to tend to the fallen sentries. Tell me if this is yours or not, Bellamy said. She dragged a large wrapped bundle from the back of her bronco and heaved it to the ground at the Baron's feet, nearly splattering his boots. A crushed and raggedly severed dragon head, still dripping, stared up at him. Someone, Baron Selphalion said coldly, has been very presumptuous in dealing with my property. Northern jade-scale wyverns are nearly irreplaceable. Then maybe you should have kept it at home, the woman answered, matching the Baron for vocal ice. This thing was over in Indiriel's farmlands. It killed a Sylvan mother and 2 children at one house and ate a boy at another. Is that all? The Baron's son laughed. Then we have much the worse of that exchange. The Sylvans can breed more brats for free, but a good wyvern costs. He trailed off, looking confused, then turned to the advisor. How much did our wyvern cost, bailiff. 106 quills of gold dust, my lord. The bailiff fidgeted unhappily, not liking the look on the High Queen's emissary's face. But his duty was to provide answers, so answer he did. Plus 10 silver every moon for care and feeding. 106. The Baron's son seemed less amused now. If we kill every peasant Indirial has, it won't add up to 106 quills. Bellamy gave him a glance before returning her stare to the Baron. He met her eye readily enough. So, you admit this is your dragon and you sent it to Indirial's lands on purpose? Of course. It is part of the HFY. A subtle hand gesture sent the archer knights fanning out to flank their Baron, hands at quivers. Baron Indirial has insulted me with his assertion that firebell flowers are more pleasing than nightsong blossoms as a banquet centerpiece. Such an offense requires a vigorous chastening. Aha! Bellamy noted the archer's movement and shifted to keep them all in view of her one good eye. And you don't just challenge Indirial to a duel or something because... As she spoke, she unslung her rifle and brought it to the low ready. The Baron seemed genuinely appalled by such a suggestion. And risk the spilling of HFY blood over such a trifle? Ridiculous. But spilling Sylvan blood is fine. Indirial has affronted me with his ill-considered opinions. A HFY through his lands is the proper, measured response. Baron Indirial will suffer inconvenience by the loss of his peasants and their farms, and my knights will get to practice their craft on living targets. All without risk of actual harm to anyone. Except the Sylvans. Anyone who matters. Bellamy let out a long sigh. You know, the more you talk, the more I have to remind myself what the High Queen said about you nobles. Be circumspect, is what she told me. See, she's all about justice for her subjects, no matter who they are. Sylvan or HFY or whatever. Protect the innocent and punish the guilty. But nobles are a special case, 'cause if you take down a guilty noble, that creates a little power vacuum. All his neighbors have a little war over the scraps he leaves behind. You get more murder and disorder, not less. That's why I have to be circumspect. So she says. High Queen Lontanelia is wise, the Baron's son smirked. In that, if not in all other things. Behind him, the bailiff winced and put his face in his hands. The Baron pursed his lips, considering. A stray breeze stirred his long flaxen hair and ruffled the fur on his half-cape's trim. The pixie bells had gone silent, the tension in the air driving the nectar-gatherers to ground. The sylvan gardeners in the flower beds watched and chewed their lips. Speaking circumspectly, then, the Baron said, carefully, what do you hope to accomplish by this confrontation you have caused here? Ideally, you cancel this stupid raiding party of yours, surrender yourself to my custody, and I take you to Tir na Nog to face the High Queen's judgment for murdering her subjects and generally being an asshole. I see. The Baron looked at his 6 archer knights on his flanks, at his son standing proud in his armor behind him, hand on hilt. He looked at his mighty tower, his many servants, and the lands around that were his. He chuckled, just a little. And do you expect that this ideal of yours will come to pass? The big woman shrugged. Not really. That's why it's an ideal. The High Queen's idea of how keeping the peace in Faerieland should work. Speaking realistically, I figure that critter of yours killed 4 people and was about to kill 5 more, for a total of 9. So, as long as I keep the body count here less than that and a war don't happen, she won't yell at me too much if the solution don't quite match her ideal. The Baron's right hand drifted to his sword hilt, while his left began to glow, softly in purplish. I think you overestimate how much power the High Queen's medallion gives you this far from Tir na Nog. Bellamy eased sideways, toward her truck. She shook her head. The medallion don't give me the power to do it. It just gives me the right. There was silence, stillness. Every hand and foot motionless. Not even a breath taken. A stiff, brittle piece that lasted one heartbeat. Then two. And then it shattered. The Baron's glowing hand shot forward, a rush of diffuse purple light clawing at the human like a dozen little hands grasping and holding, trying to bear her to the ground. But she fired at the same moment, a rushed hip shot jerked just slightly off target by his spell that caught the Baron in the right shoulder. The shielding enchantment on his armor sparked and died, the floral-engraved pauldron and true silver mail under its load but couldn't stop the jacketed .357 Magnum, and the Baron's shoulder was blasted to a ruin of bloody meat. The purple light vanished and the unseen hands no longer gripped. She leaped behind the Bronco, crouched, putting metal between herself and the arrows that were already being knocked to bowstrings. One of the archer knights was still in her field of view. His bow swung toward her, string drawing back. He was only following his Baron's orders, but you buy your ticket, you take your ride. She put the buckhorn sight on his chest and blew his heart to tatters. The arrow went into the ground. Other arrows rattled off the Bronco's battered old hide, new dings and nicks lost among the old ones. As she worked the rifle's lever, she had a sudden memory of a day when she was 8 years old, playing cowboys and Indians with some boy cousins. Some rusty old cap guns and a stick with kite string for a real Apache bow. Arguing over who got who and whether they were dead or just winged. No need to argue that today. More arrows struck the ford. Weird. Elves were puny, but they were damn good shots. It wasn't like them to waste arrows shooting at something they couldn't hit. Unless they were just trying to pin her down for some reason. She turned just in time to see two knights coming around the front of her truck, on her blind side. They had dropped their bows, rushing in with swords, slim-bladed and gently curved, ideal for use on unicorn back. The one in front caught a slug that blew a mist of blood out the back of his helmet. The survivor came on, slashing before she could cycle the action. Had the elf aimed low, his blow might have landed. But he went for her head in an overarm cut and a near-panicked slash of her rifle barrel knocked the blade aside. Steadied, she followed the motion with a butt stroke to the face before he could recover. The knight was knocked back, rubber-legged, giving her time to recock the Marlin. A .357 to the chest from contact distance sent him into the next world. She tried to get a look through the Bronco's windows at what the remaining elves were up to. She got just a momentary glimpse before an arrow cracked the passenger side glass. She saw the Baron, white-faced but still on his feet. The Baron's son was at his side, both his hands and the Baron's wound glowing yellow. Some sort of healing spell, probably. Two of the archers hovered protectively, shooting. The third was lying on the ground. She hadn't shot that one. Why would he be down like that? The answer came a split second after the question in the form of an arrow streaking through the clover under the Bronco. It missed her calf narrowly enough that the broadhead sliced a cut across the shaft of her boot. Bellamy quickly got herself behind the front tires. She held the rifle above her head and fired a blind shot across the Bronco's hood. Recocked and did it again. This time a pair of arrows skipped across the truck's hood just as she got her hands back down. She smirked nastily as she dug 3 shells out of a cargo pocket and fed them into the loading gate without looking. She'd taken the old cowboy lesson to heart and opted for a rifle that could fire the same round as her backup pistol, so she only had to carry one type of ammo. The .357 Magnum was small enough to be quick-loading and easy to carry, but big enough to do the job on most anything in the Fey realms. She stuck the rifle up and blind-fired again. Hopefully, she had the elves trained now. Worked the lever, poked up gun and hands again, but this time, didn't fire. Jerked the rifle back down and let the expected arrows pass overhead. As soon as they did, popped up, elbow on the hood. 2 of the knights were reaching to their quivers. The third was kneeling, arrow already knocked. She put the sights on that one and shot him through the ribs before he could get his bowstring drawn. Quickly jacked the lever and shifted aim to another archer. Rushed the shot and missed. Tried again and hit her man just before he could release his own shot. The elf's arrow broke against the truck fender as he fell, clutching his belly. She drew a bead on the third archer, but he had already dropped his bow and was turning to run. Fine with her if he wanted to quit. She held her fire and let him go, shifting her attention back to the two nobles. Too late. She'd exposed herself too long, leaning across the hood, and Baron Selthalion, whether from healing magic or pure spiteful will, was still in the fight. The purple light enveloped her head and arms. The unseen little hands clutched and clawed, dragging her. The Baron's right arm was useless hanging meat, but his left hand curled and pulled, ablaze with power. She braced her legs and tried to fight it, tried to use her extra mass and the Ford's bulk to anchor herself, but the Baron was having none of it. A slash of his hand and she was dragged sideways around the front of her truck, pulled harder as more of her came into the Baron's view and the purple glow spread. The rifle was yanked from her hand, nearly breaking her fingers, and thrown away into the flower beds. Bellamy stopped trying to hold herself back and instead lunged forward, leading with her left shoulder. The effect was to turn her sideways, so that she was momentarily being pulled left side first. This put her right hand out of the Baron's line of sight and the glow around it weakened, the invisible grip slackening just enough to let her reach into her front pocket. The elf magic tore at her, grasped her, spun her around, and slammed her into the side of the Bronco, pinning her there with a wall of force. The Baron's hand was pushing outward now, his teeth bared in a rictus of pain-fueled rage. With a gesture, he pulled her toward him, then flung her up against the truck again. The back of her head bounced off sheet metal and she saw stars. Satisfying as that must have been, the magical effort cost him and the purple light began to dim a little. The force holding her in place went from feeling like 3 sumo wrestlers dogpiling her to maybe 2.5. More importantly, the hand in her pocket still had a good grip. The Baron's son saw his father weakening and drew his sword, a heavier version of the knight's weapons, aglow with engraved elvish runes. "Your head shall go on the wall of our hunting lodge, ogress," he taunted as he advanced on her, careful not to block the Baron's magic by getting directly between them. "And every peasant's head I take in the chevauchee, I shall take in your name. What think?" He was still 4 steps away when a gunshot split the air, cutting him off. It didn't hit anything, but the 2 that came right after it did. The Baron's son put a hand to his belly and looked down at the blood welling through his punctured chainmail there. He looked up and saw the smoking, ragged hole in the woman's pocket. He staggered, tried to use the sword to prop himself up, and went to his knees almost within touching distance of her. A cry of pain was just beginning in his throat when the gun boomed again and the Baron's son saw no more. Baron Selthalion gave a high, wordless sob, a heartrending wail that matched the cry of the sylvan whose child his wyvern had eaten. His son lay still in the clover, the back of his head blown out. The Baron strained, surging his magic to the utmost, trying to smash the hated woman into the steel behind her, trying to grind her to paste. But he was weakening, wounded, failing. Even rage and hate and soul-scouring anguish couldn't keep his power going. "Bailiff," he gasped. "Kill her. Kill her for me. I order it." The robed elf stood in the tower's doorway. He was shaking and his hands were balled into fists. But he did not move from that spot. The Baron dared a glance back over his shoulder at his vassal. "Kill her, bailiff. Take my sword and cut out her heart. Now. I can't keep holding her." The bailiff sighed and shut his eyes. There was a wetness on his cheek that could have been a tear. But he still made no move. The Baron's arm began to sag and the glow of his magic dimmed further. The woman was straining against him now, moving bit by bit. He focused on the hand in her pocket and the weapon that must be in there, the weapon that had taken his child and heir. He sought to push it down and away, she struggled to bring it to bear on him. "Bailiff. Kill her and I will give you everything. The barony. All that I have. Kill her and it is yours." "My lord," said the bailiff, voice steady and face suddenly resolute, I am your vassal and need no bribe to do my duty. He raised his eyes, jaw set. But I will not act against our queen. The Baron's eyes narrowed, darted left and right, looked for options. But the retainers he had on hand were all dead, dying, or out of the fight. The rest of his fighting elves were leagues away, gathering on the border with Indiriel's lands. The servants were mere sylvan peasants, useless even were he willing to debase himself so far as to plead for their help. His magic was failing, the only question whether it would run out before he passed out from strain and blood loss. There were only two options remaining. One of those was surrender to the High Queen's pet human beast, which to a high fae of his stature was no option at all. No, there was only one path left for a noble of ancient high fae pedigree. The purple glow around Bellamy's body vanished as the Baron dropped his left hand to his belt, fumbled out the dagger there, and charged. The age-old battle cry of the downland glades fae was on his lips, though it came out as a rasping, breathy snarl. Everything he had left, he put into crossing the dozen paces between them. But an elf is slower than a human. Bellamy's hand came out of her pocket before the Baron had taken 2 steps. In it was a scarred old snub-nose revolver, hammer bobbed and barrel chopped, a gun for use at knife-fight distance. There was a single round left in the cylinder. The Baron was just over halfway there when she brought the muzzle to bear on his chest. There was a blast and a flash of flame that filled the Baron's whole vision. And then he reached her, touched her, the vile thing that had taken all but honor from him. He clinched with her, stabbing upwards. But his arm was slow to respond, feeble. The tip of his blade merely scratched at her through her clothes, then fell from his hand. His knees buckled and he slid down her, leaving a smear of blood. He was having trouble breathing. Coughed out blood. Tumbled onto his back. He could barely see her now as she stood over him, reloading. "Curse you," he breathed. "You have extinguished a glorious lineage." Bellamy sighed and shook her head. "Nah. I just put down another criminal. No more, no less." But by the time she'd spoken, Baron Sulfalion was beyond hearing. Seeing no immediate threats remaining, she started tromping through a bed of flowers the color of a little girl's dream, looking for her rifle. It felt like she might be bleeding from the Baron's final stab, but in the Fey realm you learned what to prioritize. Terrified pixies burst from cover and fled at every step, while the sylvan gardeners watched her with unreadable eyes. She found the marlin without too much trouble, checked to make sure the muzzle hadn't gotten plugged with dirt or pixie guts or anything, and began stuffing cartridges in the loading gate. Once satisfied, she slung the rifle and pulled up her shirt to check that cut. Just an oozing scratch. Most of the blood on her was elvish. While she did all this, the bailiff stepped out of the tower's gateway, surveying the battlefield. Seeing that one of the knights she'd shot was still alive, he quickly summoned a group of servants to carry the wounded elf inside. A winged meadow sprite was given instructions to fetch a healer from the nearest village. Gardeners were tasked with gathering up the dead. His orders given, the bailiff knelt beside his fallen lord, whispered something, and brushed the dead elf's eyes closed. The servants had brought out a shield bearing Sulfalion's family crest and were placing the Baron on it when B.J. Bellamy got back to her bronco. The bailiff still stood beside it, supervising the impromptu pallbearers. He gave her a slightly nervous look from the corner of his eye as she came up next to him. Are you going to kill me, Lady Emissary?" "Well, I don't know," she drawled, propping herself against her truck. "Are you gonna do something stupid like attack me or go kill a bunch of farmers because you don't like their boss's taste in party favors?" "I have no plans to do so, Lady Emissary." She shrugged. "Then neither do I." They watched the servants raise the Baron on his bier and carry his corpse away. They both looked up and watched the breeze stir the pennons flying from the tower. The jingle of pixie bells began to once again fill the air. "I appreciate what you did back there," she said after a moment. "You most likely saved my ass." The bailiff's voice was heavy with the weight of the choice he had made. I literally did nothing, Lady Emissary. Bellamy nodded. That's right. And you did it at exactly the right moment. Despite the situation, the bailiff couldn't help but puff out a single, short laugh at that. Seriously, she went on. You could have stabbed me and got yourself a barony out of the deal. Thanks for turning that down. I am a loyal subject of my baron, but a loyal subject of the High Queen, as well. My baron was, in the wrong. Besides, even had I tried, I doubt not you would have managed to slay me anyhow. He cast a meaningful look at the blackened hole in her pants pocket. The muzzle of her backup gun was poking through it. Yeah, probably, she agreed. But maybe not. Anyway, Southalion set the price for my life at 1 barony. Reckon I can agree with that appraisal. The bailiff turned to look at her. She was still staring thoughtfully up at the tower's flags. Barony needs a baron, or all the other asshole nobles will start cutting throats over it. Lots of innocent folks will die and the High Queen will yell at me. You seem to have your shit together and you're loyal to the crown. So, you want it? The bailiff was silent for a while, fussing with his robe and staring at the blood on the clover. I will not say the idea has no appeal, Lady Emissary, he said, picking his words. Nor say there is not merit in it. The Baron has had no heirs save his son, and if we do not have a legitimate lord, our neighbors will indeed make this place the battleground of their ambitions. However, elevating my humble self to the ranks of the nobility is not merely a matter of saying it and making it so. She raised a hand and cut him off. I got a bunch of blank patents of nobility in the truck. All we've got to do is fill in your name. He just stared as she opened the door and grabbed a piece of folded parchment that was clipped to the Bronco's sun visor. Once unfolded and flattened against the fender, it proved to indeed be a royal patent declaring that, blank, was to be elevated to the rank of, blank, Lord of, blank, in gratitude for services rendered to the crown, etc., etc. The High Queen has already signed this, the bailiff blurted, scandalized. This is her magical seal at the bottom. Why would you carry an entire bundle of pre-signed blank patents of nobility with you everywhere? For the same reason I keep things like guns and chainsaws and leprechaun repellent handy. The same reason why the High Queen chose me to be keeper of the peace. The bailiff seemed confused by that. Because you are enormous and terrifying. She frowned. That wasn't the kind of thing to say to a lady. Even one who was enormous and terrifying. No. Because I believe in being prepared. Prepared for what, Lady Emissary? Anything. Everything. When you're upholding the High Queen's law and order in magical fucking Faerieland, you've got to be prepared for whatever. She pulled a ballpoint pen from her shirt pocket and thrust it into his hand. If you really believe in the High Queen's ideas, becoming a baron is your chance to join the team and maybe do some good in this fucked up world. The bailiff thought about it for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to write.